We have just come through Easter, so we talked about the resurrection. So I thought tonight we'd talk about, because people talk about the resurrection, whether it was true, can you prove it? Is there any evidence that it happened other than faith? Is there any evidence other than that it happens? So that's what I wanted to talk about tonight, instead of a kind of detour from what we were studying. So I've got the resurrection, truth or myth. And I want to start with Luke, 1st chapter, 1st verse. And it says, many have undertaken to compile a narrative about the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as the original eyewitnesses and servants of the word handed them down to us. So it also seemed good to me, since I have carefully investigated everything from the very first, to write to you in an orderly sequence, most honorable Theophilus. And no, I don't know who Theophilus is, and nobody else does either. It's debated still to this day. So that, verse 4, so that you may know the certainty of the things about which you have been instructed. And if you'll notice the things that I have underlined, because it says a narrative about the event. So this is a narrative. This is Luke writing. And then they have original eyewitnesses. So he had access to the original eyewitnesses. He carefully investigated so that you may know the certainty. So is there historical documentation of the resurrection is what I want to talk about tonight. And the question I have under that is, what is meant by historical and what is meant by documentation? That makes a difference in what you're talking about and how we're discussing this. And hopefully that definition will come out very shortly, and you'll be able to see where I'm coming from. Why would the 4 historical accounts in the New Testament not be considered historical? We have 4 accounts of the resurrection in our Bibles. They were not all written at the same time by the same person, but we have 4 accounts. Why would they not be considered historical? And I said, should the Gospels be considered historical or religious or spiritual? And my answer is yes. It should be all of those. So why would you discount these 4? They say outside of the Bible, there is the way people will start that discussion. Okay, let's back up. The 4 accounts, the 4 Gospels, why are you leaving those out when you talk about historical accounts? From what Luke just said, does it sound like he was recording a historical account or a superstition? It would be more of a historical account. So let's go to the 2nd chapter of the book of Luke, the 1st verse. In those days, the decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole empire should be registered. This first registration took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria. So everyone went to be registered, each to his own country. Okay, who's the 2 people that I have underlined there? Quirinius and Caesar Augustus. Okay, who were they? Caesar Augustus was born Gaius Octavius. He was the first Roman emperor. He's the founder of the Roman Empire from 26 BC to 14 AD. They have historical documentation, along with this historical documentation of who he was. At the same time, it says Quirinius was governor of Syria, and it says here Quirinius governed Syria twice. First from 12 to 4 BC, and then from 6 to 12 AD. He was appointed governor after the banishment of Herod Archelaus in AD 6. Herod Archelaus was one of the sons of Herod the Great. Herod the Great died, and you remember in the book of Matthew, I think it was, when it said that they escaped to the Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, went to Egypt. And they heard that Herod had died, so they came back, and they heard that his son was on the throne, so they, instead of going to Bethlehem, they went to Nazareth. Well, this was his son that was on the throne at that time, except he was not king over the whole area, and I think that'll come out in a minute. So Let's go to somebody else. Tacitus, first century historian that everybody that studies history of that particular age agrees that his writings were historical. He's a first century historian. In his writing, The Annals, he praised Quirinius for his achievements, but also criticized him for his persistent trial of his wife, Lepida. We won't get into what all the trial was, but he accused her of several things. And his avarice in his old age. Tacitus' portrayal of Quirinius as a capable soldier and statesman is supported by other historical sources. It says other historical sources, including Josephus, who was a first century Jewish historian who was a Roman citizen, and the Tivoli inscription. Despite the mixed memories of Quirinius among the Roman Senate, Tacitus' account provides a glimpse into the life and times of this notable figure in Roman history. So all this is talking about Tacitus as a historian and these historical events that he recorded. The Tivoli inscription was discovered in 1764 near Rome. It's believed to be at the tomb of Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, who served as a governor of Asia and so on. You see down there, it says, during the reign of Emperor Augustus, it tells the dates. This inscription is significant as it provides historical context regarding the Roman governance in the region during that period. Here is what it looks, if you can read Latin, everyone can read Latin and tell me what it says, you can read that. This is a picture of the Tivoli inscription, but if you can't read it, I just want you to know that's what it looks like. So, the last Latin I had was when I was in the 9th grade in high school. That was about I had 1 year, and that was about 1965.
Do you remember what I told you about Latin? The poem that was in the front of my Latin book?
Mm-hmm.
Latin is a dead language. It died by the sea. It killed all the ones, and now it's killing me.
Okay, now catch this. Tacitus wrote 2 major historical texts. He wrote 2 that we know of, Annals and Histories. Only about half of this original text has survived, with the first 6 books of the Annals surviving in a single manuscript from Germany, and the second half in a single manuscript from Italy. The surviving portions of the Annals focus on the reigns of Tiberius, Claudius, Nero, and those who reigned in the year of the 4 emperors, when they had 4 emperors in the same year. It's a long story. We're not going to get into all that history. But you see what it says. There's 1 manuscript of each that they have. And he's considered by historians to be an historian, and his accounts are considered historically correct. Okay. There are no surviving original first century manuscripts of Josephus' works. However, several manuscripts exist that have been preserved over the centuries, with the oldest manuscripts in Greek dating to the 10th and 11th centuries. So he wrote these in the 1st century. The oldest manuscripts we have are in the 10th and the 11th century. And there's only a few of them. Several manuscripts, there's only a few of them, but he's considered a valid historian that writes history, but we only have a few of his manuscripts. And we only have 2, one of each of Tacitus, who was also a 1st century historian. Now, there are over 350 ancient manuscripts of the book of Luke. Do you get that? So what am I getting at? There's 350 of these. There's only, and people question whether he was a historian, but yet he gives historical dating and historical figures to date what he writes. But they consider Tacitus and Josephus and the Tivoli text, only one text, all that's history. But Luke is religious material, so it can't be included as history. So, do you think that's a little bit prejudicial on some people's part? I think so. And I wrote down ancient manuscripts of Josephus and Tacitus work at just a few of those, and there's 350 of the book of Luke. So I would consider, so when somebody says, when they start a discussion out, well, is there any evidence outside the Bible? They say, well, we have 4 historical accounts in the Bible. Why do you want to leave those out? Why do you want to leave those out? Is it because you're prejudiced against those? In other words, put it on them. You need to be looking at this differently. So when you say outside of the Bible, by the way, there is account outside of the Bible about the crucifixion and things out and reasons I'm going to give in just a minute for the resurrection that will show proofs of what we're talking about. Luke 3:1. I'm going to stick with Luke for just a minute. 3:1. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, while Pontius Pilate was the governor of Judea, Herod was tetrarch of Galilee. His brother is Herod Archelaus, by the way. Herod was tetrarch of Galilee. His brother Philip, tetrarch of the region of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Lysanias, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. God's word came to John, the son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. So look at all these men that I have their names. We know them from history. We have historical accounts saying they are in history. Luke, in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd chapters, he starts those out with a historical accounting, and he ties them into the names of people that we know from history. If that's not accurate way of recording history, I don't know what is. Wes Huff said this: Jesus truly died. That's a historical fact. And then he appears to his disciples alive again. That's a historical question. He hadn't finished his question. Dead, buried, seen alive. What do we do with that? How do we answer that historically? And I think there needs to be given an account for the disciples' actions afterwards. They saw something and it completely, radically changed their world. So, what were the disciples like before the resurrection? Well, they were hiding. They were afraid. What did they do when they came to get Jesus? They ran. They hid. We see in our mind, we see the crucifixion, Jesus hanging on the cross, and we kind of pictured all 11 of the apostles gathered around there. And we don't know if any of them were there, except for John. Well, John was there because it mentions about him. But the rest of them, it doesn't say. It doesn't say whether they're there. So we don't know which ones are there. But we know that they were hiding, that they were afraid. And then the resurrection comes. Now, let me ask you a question. If I came in here tonight, I said, listen, we're going to get this together. And I come up with a story. And I said, we're going to go with this story. I'm making it up, but we're all going to say it's true. And we're going to go out and proselytize people. We're going to get people to follow this. But now let me tell you the rest of this story. They're going to arrest you. They're going to beat you up. They're going to abuse you. And most of you, they're going to execute. So I want you to help me tell this lie. And you're going to be willing to die for a lie. Right? Well, would you think all the disciples believed that it was true if they were willing to die for it? That's what Wes Huff is getting at here. Evidence of the resurrection. Number 1. The tomb really was empty. The tomb was empty. Jesus' body was still in the grave. Christianity ends before it begins. The movement started in Jerusalem. Within weeks of the crucifixion, under hostile scrutiny, had the authorities been able to produce a body, they certainly would have. So this happens, this resurrection happens in the city where he was crucified, where everybody watched him get crucified, where the religious leaders saw him get crucified, and now he's risen from the grave, the disciples say, and there's an empty tomb where his body used to be. What was the answer that the Pharisees, Sadducees, and all of them gave? The guards came to him and said, he's gone. They gave him money and said, we want you to go tell everybody that his disciples stole his body away. So did they know that something had happened besides that? Yes, because they were paying somebody else to tell a lie for them.
trace down his book, because it's just coming out. Says they, he spent 14 years with the religious people in Jerusalem and looking for things, and he said they were total evidence of the resurrection and the burial, death, the whole thing, and many other things.
Well, that's what we're going through tonight. Even the non-Christian historian Michael Grant acknowledged that historians applying normal standards cannot simply dismiss the empty tomb. The earliest counterclaim, first reported in the Gospel of Matthew, was the disciples stole the body away. In saying that he stole the body away, they were admitting that the tomb was empty. Even in the excuse they were coming up with, they were admitting. So the empty tomb, the first one I want to look at is the fact the tomb was empty then. The tomb is empty today. There's no body in that tomb. Number two, the first witnesses were the least credible. All four Gospels, who first reported Jesus being raised from the dead? Women. If you were going to write an article in the first century and you were going to make up a story, would you write your book to say that women were the ones that discovered it first? No, you wouldn't. Even, it says, as even a skeptical scholar, Bart D. Ehrman, who at one time says he's a Christian, he says he's an atheist now. I don't know if he's an atheist or agnostic. He's a professor up at UNC. He's a brilliant man, but he's not very smart when it comes to the spiritual life. Even a skeptical scholar, Bart D. Ehrman, has pointed out this is not the kind of detail early Christians would be likely to invent in a culture where female testimony carried less weight. If you're crafting a persuasive story, you don't start here. So answer number two, if you're going to tell a story and you're going to make up a story, you would make it up that somebody else discovered it first, even if you come up with the women did later. If you'll notice, people talk about Christianity and say that the writers of the Bible and the Christian faith are misogynist, they're against women. Find me that in the New Testament. Find me that in Jesus' teaching. You can't. Number three, the disciples' behavior doesn't make sense otherwise. Before the resurrection, Jesus' followers were scattered, afraid, and hiding afterward. They were publicly proclaiming that he was risen. They were running around town telling everybody that Jesus rose from the dead. At real personal cost, knowing it could mean persecution and even martyrdom. New Testament scholar E.P. Sanders said this, that Jesus' followers, and later Paul, had resurrection experiences is, in my judgment, a fact. What the reality was that gave rise to the experiences, I do not know. I know, but he doesn't know. So he doesn't know what gave rise to that, but he's convinced that they did believe that Jesus raised from the dead. Number four, the earliest testimony is too early to be legend. In other words, it takes a while for a legend to take place. And these accounts are too early. 1 Corinthians 15, Paul's writings, 1 Thessalonians, Ephesians, 1 Corinthians, about any biblical scholars that I know of believe that his writings were written down before the four Gospels were. Before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So they're older. And this is what he says in 1 Corinthians 15, 3-5. For I passed on to you as most important what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scripture, that he was buried, that he raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. So this is, we're talking about not many years after the fact of what happened. He's telling this is already into place. It takes years for legends to develop. For stuff that's not true. For something that's true, right away. New Testament scholar James D.G. Dunn dates this material to within just a few years of the crucifixion. That's far too early for legend to develop, with no time for stories to evolve, circulate, and displace living eyewitnesses who would correct them. So if they were starting to create a legend about the resurrection of Jesus within just couple of years after it happened, the people that were eyewitnesses to what happened were still alive on the earth, and they'd say, well, that's not true. You wouldn't do that where the eyewitnesses were. If you're going to start something that's not true, you're not going to do it around the people who are eyewitnesses, are you? You're not going to go to the people. You want to make sure you hide somewhere and take it to some other country, do something, but it all happened here in this same area. Number 5. There were multiple overlapping eyewitness claims. We don't have just one resurrection story. We have multiple early accounts and traditions, including the 4 detailed narratives presented by the Gospel. Some people will say, but the 4 accounts in the Gospels are different. And I say, and it was 4 different people that wrote it down. An example I always like to use is if you had never been in this room and it was pitch black and somebody led you in here and sat you down at the table where you are and flipped the light on for 1 second and turned it off, and then carried you back outside and say, Diana, what did you see? And she said, I saw a picture on the wall. I said, Jean, what did you see? She said, I saw a table with some plates on it. Everybody could say something different, but would everybody be telling the truth? Did everybody see the same room? So everybody's seeing the crucifixion. If 20 people were standing out there watching Jesus being crucified, are they all looking from the same angle? Are they all experiencing the same feelings? Some of the same, yes, but not all. Are they all remembering the same things that occurred? But you take all 4 of them, you put them together, you have a more complete story. But they overlap. According to Richard Bachman, the Gospels are best understood as closely tied to eyewitness testimony. Why? Because they read like accounts anchored to real people, named witnesses, stable core detailed, and traditions formed while eyewitnesses were still alive to check with. You still have the eyewitnesses there, and all these overlap. There's certain things about the stories that are the same on all 4 accounts. Unless you get together and decide, look, we're all going to write, I want you to write this part, and I want you to write this, and we know that's not the way it happened. Number 6, skeptics and enemies didn't stay that way. 2 of the most important early Christians weren't early believers at all, James and Paul. We won't go into the stories of why and how and so on, but you know what happened with Paul, because it tells, but it doesn't tell you as much with James. But James didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. Paul didn't believe it. He stood there and held the coats for him to stone Stephen to death, the first martyr. So he didn't believe it, but then within just a little while after that, he became a believer. Number 7, it spread fast in the place where it could be most easily disproved. That's where it spread the fastest, is where it could be disproved. Christianity didn't grow slow as a tale imported from some distant religion. It took off in Jerusalem, the very place where Jesus had been publicly executed and buried. Publicly executed and buried. The people saw him publicly, and the place where its radical claims could be readily checked, challenged, and shut down. So we're talking, it spread too fast for that to happen in that place. New Testament scholar Larry Hurtado has shown how rapidly this has occurred in his writings. We won't get into those yet because we'll be here all night. Number 8, the pagan copycat theory falls apart under scrutiny. There's people that say that Jesus' birth, death, resurrection was all copied from a pagan origin from whichever one. And this one I gave an example here is Mithras. And they say that they stole that from Mithras because Mithras raised from the dead. Well, if you read this, look it up when you get home if you want to, about Mithras. It didn't say he rose from the dead. And it mentions here, I think it says, killing a sacred bull creates new life and order. Do you know what you did to be initiated into, baptized into Mithraism? Do you know what you did? They put you in a pit. They put a bull like on a grate above you and slaughtered him and let the blood pour down on you, and that's what initiated you into the group. Does that sound like anything like Jesus' death and resurrection? And nowhere in any of the Mithras myth does it say anything really about him being raised from the dead. Neither does any of the others. Any of them that says that it was copied after him, all you have to do is read them more thoroughly, read what it has to say about them, read what really happened, and you'll understand that that's not really so. Just like the virgin birth. Some of them say the virgin birth was copied from pagan origins as well, which, yeah. Wes Huff. It seems that the gospel authors get the details right. The small details, things like geography and name correlation and even plant life in some instances. And so, if they get the small details right, I don't think it's that big of a leap to say that they get the big details right. So, we have those reasons that you can believe that the resurrection really happened that are outside of the Bible. Plus, we have the 4 historical accounts in the Bible, as well as other writings from Tacitus and Josephus, by the way, that mentioned about Jesus in their writings, in first century writings. So we can establish that he was on this earth, but we have 4 historical accounts, and they're called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Questions?